Once the last day of April, known as May Eve, the night before May Day, was considered as much a day where the veil between worlds was thin as was Halloween. The difference, though, is that on Halloween, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was thin. This was positively benign compared to the worlds thought to cross into ours on May Eve, a day when we intersect with other planes of higher and lower order. As May Eve approaches, we present a story for that night, the forgotten sibling of Halloween. This story is called A Perfect Pairing, Part 1 of a serialized tale. As Tasmin Aubrey, a vision of beauty and grace in the finest attire of the era, moved through the winding lanes of Witheringdale, the quaint village in the Sussex Downs seemed to come alive around her. Her self-assured stride, a testament to her upbringing, caught the eye of every passerby. The sun danced playfully on her golden locks as she made her way to the dwelling of the village wise woman. Her delicate features belied the strength and cunning that lurked beneath the surface, a dangerous allure that no doubt held many in thrall. Meanwhile, an eerie, shadowy figure trailed behind her, its intentions unclear and its presence seemingly unnoticed by Tasmin. The spectral figure, shrouded in darkness, whispered from behind, its voice laced with bitterness and envy, "You fool yourself, Tasmin. Do you truly believe you can succeed where I have failed?" Tasmin cast a sidelong glance at the figure, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Jealousy does not become you," she chided softly before continuing on her way, leaving the spirit to seethe in her wake. Nestled at the edge of the village, Mother Agnes' humble hut stood with an air of quiet wisdom. The wise woman, a figure of considerable age, bore a face etched with the lines of time and experience, her hair a wispy halo of silver. As Tasmin entered, she was greeted by the warm, earthy scent of herbs and the flicker of candles casting their amber light on the walls. "Now, what's a sorcerer of your stature doing seeking the counsel of an old village witch like me, eh?" Agnes inquired in her Sussex country drawl, her weathered hands still at work over her mortar and pestle. Tasmin, her voice carrying the lilting melody of posh London Victorian, replied with a hint of playful flippancy, "Oh, Mother Agnes, I've just returned from a most interesting visit to the coastal town of Tideswell, not far from Portsmouth. I simply must share with you the tale I heard there." Agnes narrowed her eyes at the young woman's lack of propriety but gestured for her to continue. "Well, you see," Tasmin began, her eyes shining with excitement, "there was this woman, Marjorie Wistwood, beautiful and loving, but oh so naive. She was betrayed by her dastardly fiancé, Gerald Kettering. Discovering his infidelity, Marjorie was driven to take her own life, but not before cursing the wretched man. She bound his spirit to a local wood, and as part of the curse, each year on May Eve, he must claim a bride to join him beneath the earth." Agnes listened, her expression a mixture of curiosity and disapproval at the young woman's apparent lack of empathy for the tragic tale. "And, my dear Agnes," Tasmin continued, her voice dropping conspiratorially, "I visited the wood myself and felt the unmistakable presence of the spirit. Isn't it simply thrilling?" The old woman frowned, her gaze searching Tasmin's features for some hint of emotion beyond the excitement of the macabre story. "Child, I fail to see what this has to do with you, or why it should interest me," she muttered cautiously. Tasmin's eyes danced with mischief as she responded, "Oh, but you will, dear Agnes. You will." Tasmin, her eyes gleaming with anticipation, continued her tale to the increasingly uneasy Agnes. "The most intriguing part of the curse, dear Agnes, is that if anyone is in the wood at sunrise on the morning of May Eve, they will be dragged back to the wood, no matter where they are, to join Gerald as one of his brides beneath the earth before the sun rises on May Day." Agnes shook her head, her expression one of disapproval and concern. "Child, you be dancing with dark forces you don't understand. Meddling with the likes of that curse could bring you great harm." Tasmin dismissed her fears with a wave of her hand. "Oh, don't worry, dear Agnes. I'm merely curious about the nature of the curse. I have no intention of meddling with it myself. Now, I need you to tell me if Marjorie Wistwood's spirit remains in the wood, or if her curse took root in the fabric of the world as she lay dying." Agnes, with great reluctance, confirmed that Marjorie's spirit was not bound to the wood, and that the curse had been woven into the world itself. She then questioned Tasmin as to why she needed this information, asserting that a sorcerer of her caliber could break the curse regardless of its nature. Tasmin laughed delightedly and kissed Agnes' cheek, a gleam of mischief in her eyes. Breaking the curse is not my intent, dear Agnes. I needed the perfect pairing, and now I have found the second part of my pair. The old woman stared in disgust at the departing Tasmin, her mind swirling with a mixture of foreboding and concern. She knew all too well the dangers of mingling with dark forces, and she could only hope that Tasmin would come to her senses before it was too late. She feared even more, though, what it would mean if Tasmin's experiment was a success. After leaving Agnes' hut, Tasmin approached a nearby fly-for-hire. With a chipper tone, she asked the driver, "Excuse me, good sir, could you please take me to the nearest place where I can send a telegraph?" The driver nodded, and Tasmin climbed into the carriage, her mind buzzing with excitement at the prospect of achieving her goal. As the carriage clattered away from Witheringdale, the shadowy figure that had followed Tasmin continued to lurk in the background, but in truth this demonic presence was as concerned at the possibility of Tasmin succeeding as Agnes was. Tasmin arrived at the telegraph office, her excitement palpable. Upon entering, she greeted the elderly telegraph operator with a chipper voice. "Good day, sir. I would like to send a telegraph to someone, if you please." The old man, named Mr. Pemberton, took out a notepad and pen, preparing to take down her message. He couldn't help but notice that Tasmin had removed her gloves and was in the process of unbuckling her shoes. "And to whom shall I address this telegraph, miss?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure despite the young woman's unusual behavior. "Thomas the Rhymer, good sir," she replied cheerfully, now having removed her stockings and standing barefoot on the cold floor. Mr. Pemberton raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress his shock at her impropriety. "Begging your pardon, miss, but who on earth is Thomas the Rhymer, and where might he be found?" As she struggled to remove her dress, Tasmin replied with amusement, "Well, you see, I cannot perform an act of necromancy while wearing my clothing. There are rules, after all. And as for Thomas the Rhymer, it's quite interesting to note that any device of man's creation for written communication can be used to contact the dead. It turns out that the telegraph, when used with necromancy, is even faster than using necromancy with a pen and parchment." By now, she had removed her corset, and Mr. Pemberton's disapproval grew stronger. "Miss, I must say, I think you are madwoman, and I will be forced to call the constable if you persist in this behavior." Undeterred and still chipper, Tasmin removed her chemise and stays, now standing completely naked. "My good sir, I have finished undressing. Now, you need to write," she said, casting her hand toward him. In an instant, Mr. Pemberton withered into a skeleton, his bony fingers operating the telegraph machine with unnatural precision. Though Tasmin's anger had flared for a moment at his defiance, she quickly regained her cheerful demeanor and began to dictate her message to Thomas the Rhymer. Tasmin suddenly paused and jokingly said to the skeletal Mr. Pemberton, "Wait just a moment. I almost forgot that the rules say nothing about hats." She picked up her lovely new hat, a recent purchase, and placed it on her head, her naked body still otherwise unadorned. Assuming a cross-legged meditative pose, Tasmin hovered a few inches above the ground, her hands moving in deft gestures as if manipulating the skeletal telegraph operator like a puppet. She dictated her message to Thomas, her words flowing with an air of excitement. "Thomas, darling, remember the cursed ruin of the Danforth family in East Anglia, near the town of Blackwood Hollow. Lord Danforth cursed his son, William, who had murdered him, to never leave the grounds, and if anyone dares to perform a certain act, I don't recall the specifics but it was nothing elaborate, but if anyone performs that certain act, William's vengeful spirit will keep them on the estate forever. That curse was written by the dying lord into the fabric of reality itself, and now, my dear, I've found another of the same ilk." Tasmin briefly recounted the other curse she had discussed with Agnes. One curse's victim cannot leave the site once they invoke the curse, and another curse's victim gets dragged back to the site of the curse after an interval of time. Competing instructions, a perfect pair indeed. So, my dear, do make your way back to Earth, taking care not to be followed through the various realms of the dead. We wouldn't want any jealous demons causing trouble because we're about to accomplish with cunning what they failed to do at the dawn of time with brute force. Find yourself a body and meet me post-haste. By the railroad it is far less than a day's journey between Tideswell and Blackwood. I suppose we should start in Tideswell, logical order of things and all. As she finished the dictation, Constable Whitmore entered the telegraph office to find the withered corpse of Mr. Pemberton standing behind the desk and a young woman, nude save for her hat, hovering in midair. "What in the name of God is going on here?" he demanded. Tasmin replied casually, "I was just about to leave, but now I suppose I'll be doing this instead." With a swift gesture, she caused the constable's eyes to be covered by a layer of skin, and a third eye, blue and glowing, opened on his forehead. Quickly dressing herself, Tasmin said to the mesmerized constable, "Step lively and come along, my good man." Together, they exited the telegraph office, leaving behind the eerie remains of Mr. Pemberton, as the sorcerer arranged the pieces of her plan like a composer arranging notes for their latest symphony.